Hello and welcome to Stupid Ancient History with Midgley
and Taylor, and our expert, non-expert and special guest James the Science Toolboy.
Hello.
As always, we're wearing togas. Someone's taken our nice comfy chairs, which is not on.
No.
But we've got a shiny new microphone, so hopefully it sounds better. And today we're going to look at the different forces in the Greek and Persian conflicts. So, previously on Stupid Ancient History, we've looked at the increasing tensions between the Persian Empire and those pesky Greeks.
And needless to say, this aggravation isn't going to go away anytime soon.
No, it's not. So we thought it'd be a bit of a good idea to look at the two different armies that we'll be fighting before we get into the detail of the different battles between the two and what happens next. Just so we've got more of an idea of who does what to who.
So, Hoplites are Greek, aren't they?
Yep.
And Immortals are the Persians.
They are.
So is there any big difference between the two of them?
Well, you say big, just stroking my eyebrows. So big is the key word here. Because of the vastness of the Persian Empire, the Persian kings could call upon huge numbers of soldiers and resources. But we've talked about this already. And the fact that they just seem to have armies kind of lying around that they could just keep gathering all the time.
Anytime they've needed an army, they've just gone...
They weren't short.
There's an army.
Yeah.
Didn't he say at one point he raised 3 to go sort out the Ionians?
Yep.
And just, I've got 3 armies, send you over, that's fine.
Exactly. So we can kind of say that they are the world's first superpower, because if you think about what a superpower in modern terms requires, you would always say that a large army is a
Vast
key component,
resources.
and able to kind of logistically get everything together very quickly is another one, and they're able to do that.
So big and powerful that no one sensibly wants to have a go at you.
Yeah,
It's not going to end well.
yeah.
No.
Before you have to call your vast armies, they need to sit down and have a think about it before they start with you.
It's kind of your, I'm trying to think, your reputation precedes itself, doesn't it?
Definitely.
It's like your reputation alone is enough to make people go, oh no, no, not messing with them, not a chance.
Something Taylor knows all too well.
I don't know what you mean.
So cutting battle tactics like from the likes of Cyrus aside, fighting rivers, using camels. The Persians' main strength was realistically that they could simply overpower any army with just their numbers.
And they had battle camels.
And yes, they had battle camels.
And gaffer tape cats.
I was going to say, don't forget about the cats, James.
The cats were an unusuality, but sheer size of the army, they could basically swamp any other army they came up against. And they had camels, and particularly cavalry played a really important role with the Persian military, as did archers.
As we've discussed, they like horses.
Yes, we're not talking about Darius.
So when we say army, how many men are we talking about?
Well, it depends on which army and whose account you go by. I mean, some of the numbers are completely ridiculous. They go up to over 1 million men.
Right, okay.
Which is nonsense. And also, you've got to remember at the time it'd be really difficult to count how many soldiers there were. Can you imagine being the Greek spy going, how many are there?
Do you think maybe some of the people that were counting had got a shot in the eye by an arrow and were just like, ugh?
Well, think of it like trying to get people to line up for a fire drill and count them is nigh on impossible. Now imagine it with thousands of them, and horses,
and dust,
camels.
and noise.
I would hope an army had a bit more discipline than our students in a fire drill.
What are you saying about our students?
That they can't stand in a line.
Yeah, all right, fair enough.
So the Greeks, however, had to take a very different approach, mostly because of kind of the circumstances that they found themselves in.
By what circumstances?
Well, Greece at the time wasn't a unified nation, so it was more of a series of kind of rival city-states. So individual city-states couldn't really gather such vast armies. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you said as well they don't really get on.
They don't get on.
No.
So Athens and Sparta aren't going to go, hey, let's club together.
Not unless something really bad happens.
But
Is Darius not a really bad thing?
Well, it can be a bad thing.
But even so, although like you say, joining together might have been a good idea, the other issue that they've got is that their population is a lot smaller. So they've not got the manpower anyway, even if they do all link together.
Yeah, Greece's population is significantly
to be able
smaller.
to
Right, okay.
launch counter-attack.
And this is particularly the issue in a state like Sparta, who are allegedly famed for their military skill and supreme military tactics because they actually chuck weak babies off a mountain.
I mean, how can you tell if a baby's
I was
weak
about
or
to ask
strong?
that.
There's a long process. We'll get into that.
Do they
later.
like chuck a rock at them and see if they start bench pressing it when they're like a week old?
No, they inspect and go, ooh, it looks a bit scrawny, it looks a bit skinny, wang it off the mountain.
So they're like fat babies.
Did
Hench babies.
the parents never object to this? It was just part and parcel of being
Apparently
Spartan?
not, yeah, it's just being Spartan. So obviously
Right.
they've got a tiny population because
They
they're
keep
too-
murdering all their
murdering their
children.
own kids.
I've
so
been
they
eating
can't
a lot
raise
of
massive
very
army.
fatty food when I was if I was pregnant.
Yeah,
Trying
they-
to bulk
they
up the
didn't eat
size
a lot
of the
food.
baby.
No, the Spartans didn't eat much food. You had to steal your food.
That's probably why they were
Really?
so
Or
thin.
fight someone for it.
Okay. This
Yeah.
is
So either way, I mean, Spartans aside, not all Greeks were yeeting babies off of mountains. So Greeks clearly, because of the small population, they had to do more with what they had rather than just rely on getting some more guys.
right. Okay.
So let's start with the Persian Immortals then.
That's quite an ominous sort of name. But is that like a scare tactic? It's like my troops are immortal.
Well, sort of, but not quite. I mean, the Persian elite troops were called Immortals because there was about 10,000 of them at any one time. And the idea of being called immortal is that the idea that if one died in battle, they would simply be replaced by the next.
Right.
So
okay.
it's almost like no matter how many of them you killed,
like a conveyor
Just
belt.
keep coming.
they're just going to come. So it's like, well, they may as well just be immortal because we
Okay.
can't kill them all.
So the Immortals were also regarded as the king's royal bodyguard.
You said there were 10,000 of them.
Yeah. So the Persians did things big again, like we were saying before.
10,000 bodyguards. How often did someone have a pop at?
With 10,000 bodyguards,
Oh,
not very
No,
often.
yeah.
Can
Yes.
you imagine trying to? Oh, we've got to assassinate Darius. Right? How do we get there? Well,
Through
there's 10,000 guys.
Safety in
guarding it.
numbers, isn't it?
Flipping heck.
So the Immortals were also the elite, but they were all very similar in appearance and they had very similar equipment. So that again, I suppose, kind of ties in with this idea of them being immortal, doesn't it? Because they look the same.
You just see this vast sea of
Was that
soldiers.
was that not normal to have all your soldiers provisioned kind of in the same way?
Not as common.
Okay.
To some extent, yes, but there were differences. Like the Greeks were very different. They basically had to provide their own armour and equipment. But the fact that there was just so many of them, you
Okay.
just look at it and go, ah. But yeah, they all trained in a similar way, had similar equipment. So if you on the screen now, you should see some nice, colourful images of Persian troops and Persian Immortals. And probably the first thing you'll notice about them is just that they are very colourful.
Yeah, they're quite kind of bold, aren't they?
I like their outfits.
They're nice, aren't they? I mean, effectively,
Yeah.
they're wearing nice, colourful
It's
pyjamas.
more interesting than like just normal run of the mill armour. And you would think as well it would be easier to move in and fight in.
Well, it doesn't
Not
look.
quite as
It doesn't look very armoured, though.
Well, I was going to
Well-
say that it doesn't look very much. Yeah, it doesn't look like it offer a lot of protection.
No, I mean, it doesn't, realistically. If you look, they've got these little cloth tiaras on the heads as well. Why are you laughing, James?
Because you say, I'm sure that's not what they are.
No, they're called tiaras.
Are they actually called
Yeah,
tiaras?
we get
Wow.
the word tiara from these little cloth Persian hats.
Oh wow.
Yeah, no, it is very light, it's very floaty, it's not very well armoured. Some soldiers would have had kind of leather jerkins, leather armour on top, but no, it's meant to be light, it's meant to be easy to move in. Bear in mind, these are troops from hot countries, so you can't be wandering around in a big woolly jumper because you get a bit sweaty.
Is it a bit like the adage with a kilt for the guy at the bottom? Like, did he wear anything underneath there? I know it's not a dressing gown, but it looks like a very
Straight-
elaborate dressing gown, doesn't it?
Straight to the bottom, are you? Never mind, never mind some highbrow discussion. What's he got on under his kilt?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll leave that to your imagination.
So on the picture on the left, there's
Yeah.
one guy with oh no, he's got a quiver as well. So
Yeah.
are they all spears and quivers?
Yeah, so the Persians prided themselves on being archers. So whenever you see an image of Darius, he's always got a bow in his hand. When he curses the Athenians, he shoots an arrow into the air. So the Persians really prefer kind of ranged fighting, these missile weapons. So archery is really, really important to them. yes, these other guy, they've got a 6-foot spear. If you look on on them, they've got this little round ball on the bottom.
Yeah.
That was the only way you could tell who was an immortal and who wasn't. They'd have a golden apple on the bottom of the spear. So it's a 6-foot spear with an iron tip, archery equipment, bow, quiver of arrows, and then if you look, they've got this shield that's made out of wicker.
Doesn't sound like that'll offer a huge amount of protection.
No, I mean, it is, you most likely find it in as a laundry basket. But again, it's because that's what they were used to doing. A wicker shield would stop an arrow fired from a distance, because you should know, it's science. They'll take all the energy out of it.
Well, that's basically what archery bows are made out of, just hay and wicker.
Yeah, so as long as it stops the arrow, to them, happy days. The problem is, a wicker shield is not going to stop a spear being shoved into your face by an angry Greek man. So there are problems. But yeah, they are generally light troops, bright, colourful, quite ceremonial. The little brick frieze that you've got there, that's from Darius's palace at Persepolis. And again, it gives you the same idea. Bows, quivers, spears, bright, ornate, and lightly armoured.
So when the apocalypse happens, if I'm following the Persian example, I need to don my pyjamas or dressing gown, make sure I've got an apple handy, and also jump into my laundry basket.
Yeah, that'll protect you against
and
the
then I'll
pillage.
be fine.
Absolutely.
But there's more. So as we mentioned earlier, the Persians were very keen horsemen.
Please don't bring that up again.
In more ways than one. So their cavalry were the envy of the ancient world, and they were heavily armoured and skilled soldiers.
That as
even
well.
there you go.
Skilled at speaking as well.
Yeah, much better than I am. Go on, what are you going to say,
No,
Mr. Ridgely?
nothing.
Something horrible and insulting.
No?
So they were very good, particularly when they were fighting on their horses.
Yeah, I mean, the aim of the Persian cavalry on the battlefield was to ride around and outflank the surrounding force. So your infantry would attack from the front, the cavalry would attack from the side, everyone would get scared and just run off.
Right.
And you could just swallow them up whole. So yeah, the attack's hard and fast and with quite significant precision, which was hard given that things like stirrups weren't common.
Okay.
So they're literally riding horses, not quite bareback, but...
Cool.
Some women have been riding side saddle for years. Shut your moaning.
Did the Greeks have anything to like counter that with? If they, yeah, I've never really heard Greeks talk about cavalry.
Not at this time, no.
Right,
Not
okay.
really.
So what did the Greeks do then if they can't like combat their cavalry?
They had a much more kind of static approach to fighting. So unlike the Persians, who favoured light outfits and kind of quick movement, the Greeks favoured heavy infantry and tight formations.
Okay, so presumably they always wait for the enemy to come to them. They were,
Yeah.
if they're just this kind of like turtling force, they can't really just like be on the move and like I'm going to chase you down.
Yeah, so it was basically because it was kind of suited to the landscape of Greece. So there were lots of valleys, there was lots of ravines, there was a very rugged landscape. So moving around a lot was more difficult.
Yeah, a lot less flat plains.
Right.
So,
okay.
I mean, ideally the Greeks would wedge themselves into one of these narrow passes, form a defensive shield wall and try and block anyone to come and attack. So if you wanted to attack them, you'd literally have to run into this shield wall.
So it's a bit like a rugby scrum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but with spears.
I mean, I've played rugby, it's violent. It may as well have spears.
So again, if you look on your screen, you've got some nice pretty pictures of a couple of hoplites. Hoplites are the standard kind of Greek infantry. They're called hoplites because if you look at all of the pictures, the most obvious thing you can probably spot is this massive round hoplon shield.
So it's named after the shield?
Yeah, so they're named after the shield. There's some discussion about this, but for all intents and purposes, they're named after this shield. Unlike the Persians who've got their little laundry basket shields, these are kind of wood, leather, and very often capped with bronze. So they're deliberately intended to stop quite serious, blunt traumas.
Okay. They're not particularly big shields, like they just seem to protect like body, like the head and the legs are exposed.
Well, The important thing with the hoplite shield, the hoplon shield, if you look at the picture of the group of soldiers together, it was wide. So the important thing was that it protected half of you and half of the man next to you. So this is why formation was really, really important. And yeah, it's big, it's round, it does leave certain parts of the body exposed. But again, if you look at what the hoplites are actually wearing, they are significantly more armoured than the Persians.
But also, doesn't it covers kind of most armour, whether it's modern day armour or ancient armour or medieval, it doesn't matter, does it? Whatever period, it's always designed so either an implement or your armour, it covers your torso basically, because if you get stabbed anywhere there...
All of your major organs are like from your neck to your crotch.
Well, that's why, going slightly off, but that's why a bayonet was designed the way it was, so that it could go in, go across, turn up, turn, go across, and then everything could just fall out on the floor.
Lovely, I did not know
That's
that.
quite a terrifying fact that I didn't know. Trying to get over that. So the hoplites are distinctly different. So if you look at either of the two pictures of the individuals, they are covered in armour.
There's also a massively long spear.
Right, yeah, so they've got an 8-foot dory spear. So the spear is longer than the Persians. They've got this bronze, leather, or sometimes linen armour cuirass covering the torso. They've got the heavy bronze shield. If you look at the chap on the right, almost the entire face is covered. So just the little eye holes. They've got bronze greaves on the legs to protect them like ancient shin guards. So they are pretty much decked out from head to toe in bronze, leather, or some form
You
of
could
protective
argue,
armour.
couldn't you, looking at that, if you're weighing all that up, that actually as a Greek soldier you've got to be physically stronger and also possibly a better, kind of more skilled fighter. Actually, you've got a massive shield, you've got such a big spear, and you've got all that heavy armour on, so it's obviously... But I suppose if you're not designed to be moving a lot... Yeah,
this is why they were more
you kind of like...
If you're wearing basically the weight of an 11-year-old in armour, you can't be running across any battlefield. So it's very static, very controlled, very precise. And if you look at the phalanx on the bottom, this unified movement, this was exactly what they did. They'd form this surrounding shield wall, usually about 8 men deep. So the spears would poke out over the top and underneath the shields. The idea was that there was no way to penetrate that shield wall, and they just simply walk in unison towards you, stabbing all the way, and if you got in the way of the stabby spears, you got stabbed.
Looking at those pictures, like the guy in the top has like a scorpion and shield, and the phalanx, they've all got different patterns. Is that like, are they family crests? Are they like just personal preference? What are they?
It's mostly personal preference. If you were from an important family, yes, you would have something that denoted that was you. Because most hoplites, because they were quite wealthy, they provided their own armour. So you'd inherit your armour from your dad, who inherited it from your granddad, and you'd add to pieces. This is why they're often quite different. So some would wear bronze armour, some would wear leather. All the shields are different. One thing that was really common, if you couldn't think of anything cool, if you look, there's a bit of a scary face.
I did notice that
on
one.
the shield. That's meant to be Medusa or a Gorgon, and the idea is to terrify the enemy as you march towards them. And to be fair, if you imagine a hoplite looking or resembling a rugby player, if you've got that many heavily armed rugby players marching towards you,
the noise would have also been phenomenal of all of that
clanking,
metal,
the stomping, just the weight. And if you're talking about thousands of men in this armour marching onto a battlefield, you would feel it. So yeah, it's very, very different to the Persians.
So they've got the hoplites and the phalanx, so they don't have any cavalry, any archers. You don't see anyone with bow and arrows or anything like that.
Yeah, so at this point, no, not really. There are a few examples of Greeks using cavalry at this time, but it's pretty limited.
Is that again because of the terrain? Like if it's all valleys and ravines, like riding a horse is just difficult?
Riding a horse isn't useful at the best of times in Greece. It's good on roads, fine, and where you see cavalry, they tend to be kind of advanced parties or scouting parties. But yeah, like I said, large parts of Greece, and particularly southern Greece at this time, isn't ideal grazing land for horses. so they don't have that many horses. It's much better for goats.
Right.
And you can't really ride into battle on a goat. That would make a very interesting style, wouldn't it?
It confused them.
Can you imagine, like, call out your troops? They come in on the goats. Got your camels coming in on the other side. Cats kind of joining as well.
Someone coming in on a parrot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be like psychological warfare. They'd have no idea what was going on. It'd be amazing.
My animal's tougher than yours. Yeah. So the Greeks did also have some light infantry kind of skirmishes and slingers rather than archers.
Okay, so just like a bit. What was it, like a bit of leather and a stone?
Leather and a stone. But I mean, they were pretty vicious. They'd sharpen stones, and you could get them going pretty quickly.
I wouldn't want to be like hitting the head with a stone.
No. It's something that the Romans definitely developed later on, and they were absolutely lethal.
Okay.
To the point where that's where we get the word bullet from. It was the little lead projectile that slingers would fire.
Okay.
And they were, But yeah, so they did have some of these kind of lighter infantry, skirmishers and archers, and these were mostly drawn from like the lower classes in Greece. They're not really regarded as key to winning battles. They're certainly not regarded as well as the heavy infantry, the phalanx and the hoplite.
So that's quite a change from kind of later on kind of, warfare where, so you're saying they put their rich, wealthy, well-brought people at the front.
Yeah, they thought they were better. It's not dissimilar to kind of, if you think like medieval England with knights and they could afford the army, they could afford to train, they could afford these things.
But obviously at some point that switches, and then like World War One, it's like, oh no.
Yeah, but it's when it's when warfare becomes mechanised, isn't it?
Right. Okay.
You don't have to buy your own artillery gun to like drag onto a field and be like, this is mine, I'm going to shoot this myself. So when it's like it's a government that is buying supplies for an army,
you're not that bothered.
Then it kind of changes. When you only need some poor schmuck to run out with a rifle, it's like, give it the poor thickos, they can do it. Clever ones will stay at the back.
Yeah. But moving back to the point, so these kind of middle class, upper class hoplites and the phalanx, they are the key unit in Greek warfare, and these are the people who are deployed onto the battlefield. So obviously the key discussion point we've got to look at here is this idea of similarity and difference. Clearly the two armies are very, very different. You'd be hard pressed to say that they are the same. They've got some similarities.
Yeah.
Spears are still a dominant weapon. Shields are still a dominant weapon.
Yeah.
The infantry is still significant, but they are fundamentally different. So when these two come to meet, it's not going to be a straightforward affair necessarily.
Yeah, no, you can't. There's not. Literally, that's what I was going to say. The only thing they've got is certain small aspects of their equipment that are the same, but even they're not on an equal footing, are they? So the shields aren't
the
same level of kind of.
One's a laundry basket.
Exactly. Yeah, I know what I'd rather have if I was going into battle.
Yeah, the Greek spear is longer, which gives them a 2-foot advantage. You could argue that
the armour as well, like
the armour
things on the head.
But again, you've got very small targets. If you think about these guys, literally covered head to toe in bronze.
Like we were saying a bit earlier, though, like it doesn't sound like the Greeks can be that aggressive, because if they just stand still and wait for people to come to them, they can never really potentially invade or.
Well, they do a lot of fighting and invading, but yeah, you'd look at the Persians as being lighter, more manoeuvrable. With the cavalry, they could effectively literally run rings around the Greeks.
What happens if they're like on an open field? You said the phalanx is designed for like ravines and like wedge themselves in. Do they just make it longer?
Yeah, they just have to stretch themselves out, and
okay.
Particularly you've got to protect your right hand side, because the right hand side of the phalanx was always the weakest. Because there's no
shields on the left.
Yeah, shields on your left, spears on your right.
Yeah.
So your right hand side is potentially the weakest and the most exposed. The other thing as well, as these things move, as the phalanxes move, they have a tendency to veer to the left, because people are trying to cover the person to the left with their shield, so they tend to move diagonally.
And also, as soon as part of your phalanx is weakened, then the rest of it will tend to fall away quite quickly. And if they're all so tightly packed, They haven't got the room, have they, to be able to break out so they can actually start fighting back. They're literally like sitting ducks. If they're not protected, they're not mobile enough, so they're just kind of stuck there. They can't go anywhere.
It would be quite a grim thing to be a hoplite, because the only way through the battlefield would be over the corpses of your enemies or your friends.
Right, okay.
So, you're wearing sandals, you're walking on, squelch, squelch, squelch. What's that? Oh, I've just stood on Brian.
Was it just basically like a meat grinder? Like it was just fought against it? Because I've seen things in Rome, the TV series, like they had similar kind of phalanx thing, and then they blew a whistle, and then one at the front would go to the back to rest.
Yeah, the Romans developed that massively, that kind of testudo formation. Yeah. At this point, the Greeks, they were very rigid. They stuck in their formation.
Where you were in the formation, that's where you were until someone died.
It worked quite well, and when someone died, you step forward and replace them. I mean, obviously, if people have seen things like 300 where they're spinning around and dancing.
Is that not how Spartans fought?
The other thing as well...
because you couldn't. You've got to wear your armour, but it's that shield wall, the impenetrability of the shield wall, and just bulldozing everything in your
The other thing that kind of strikes me is I know that obviously if you've got horses, your enemy knows that you've got horses, but you can still kind of change your tactics and the way that you fight.
Yeah, the formation could move.
If you've got just your phalanx and everyone knows that is how you fight, then you can actively try and plan how you're going to get around that. So their predictability becomes their weakness, doesn't it? Because other people know, well, that's how they're going to fight. That's what they're going to look like. This is what we can do to try and get around it. It's very much like the aspect of a standing force and guerrilla warfare that we've talked about before. It's not going to work.
No, not at all. I mean, this is why things like strategy and where you chose to fight was equally as important to the Greeks. So they'd spend months dancing around each other, deciding on where to fight, as to where would give them the best advantage. So the strengths and weaknesses to both. The Persians are much lighter, they're much more mobile, they're arguably much more flexible, but they tend to have the problem of being less coordinated because there's so many of them. The Greeks tend to be smaller, more static, more uniform, and have a standard way of doing things. But again, they are slower, they are more vulnerable to being surrounded. There's lots of problems on either side. So neither side has got a clear advantage, even though when you look at the two soldiers next to each other, you're like, that one. I want to be that one. But when it comes to the actual conflict, there is the obvious advantages and disadvantages kind of disappear in the bigger picture of
the Greeks are probably thinking, if they're fighting on home turf as well, that it doesn't matter if the others are more mobile, because the landscape is so rugged and difficult that the others won't know or be able to get around that landscape to actually kind of manipulate the army and exploit their weaknesses. But if it's the other way round and they're fighting maybe in Persia where it is big, open and flat, then
they are at a disadvantage.
They are at a massive disadvantage, aren't they? And it's also kind of just expecting or assuming that your enemy won't try and go around you and things like that, which if they're more...
Well, they're obviously expecting it. This is why the strategy's important.
Yeah, but if they're more kind of mobile, then that kind of plays... The landscape, I think, the Greeks think that the landscape is going to be their enemy's downfall.
Yeah.
Whereas actually for their enemies, because they're lighter armoured and they're more mobile, the landscape actually becomes a bit less of an issue.
Provided, of course, the Persians don't land on any flat land.
Yeah.
Then there's problems. So there you have it, a quick look at the difference between Hoplites and Persian Immortals. Thank you for listening. We hope this has been useful. As always, leave us a comment below, and until next time, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.